This video will be about collective rights. If you want to know a specific question, just click on it, and it will skip to that part. If you want to see all the questions, just let the video run through. This brings us to our first question. What are collective rights? Collective rights are rights guaranteed to specific groups in Canadian society for historical and constitutional reasons. Then what are these specific groups and who belongs to them? There are three specific groups: the Aboriginal peoples, the Francophones, and the Anglophones. If you know the meanings, quite respectively, French-speaking people are Francophones and English-speaking people are Anglophones. The Aboriginal people are a bit different. They have three kinds of people, which I will call subgroups. These are the Métis, the First Nation, and the Inuit. Then who belongs to these subgroups? Métis are people who ascended from a First Nation mother and a European dad. First Nations are people who ascended from the native people of North America. First Nations are referred to as Indians for legal and constitutional significance. The First Nations didn't choose this name and don't like it. The Inuit are people who ascended from the native people of northern Canada. So why do these groups and their members get collective rights? These groups get collective rights because they were part of the founding peoples of Canada. Canada would not exist today without the contributions of these peoples. What do collective rights do for these groups? Let's say you're a Francophone parent and you live in a province that Francophones are the minority group. You want your child to grow up having French as a first language, but you don't have the money to put your child in a French private school. And there probably isn't even a French private school. Collective rights allow you to go to the government and say you want a publicly funded Francophone school. If the government says no, since collective rights are in the Constitution, you can bring the government to court to get your school. How do collective rights affect how the government is run? Well, back in 1876, the Canadian government passed the Indian Act. This act was made to help give First Nations collective rights. The one problem was that the government did this without consulting First Nations. So even though the Indian Act gave the Canadian government some rights, it also was very discriminating. Like, to get any of the benefits, you had to be a status Indian, which the government decided, and that each reserve had an Indian agent, which told you if you could leave the reserve. Indian agents had the power to individually decide how the government would fulfill its duties, creating some bias. Collective rights now have changed this by now the government would have would have to consulted with the First Nations before passing the act. Today, the government couldn't pass any act relating to the First Nations without consulting them first. To conclude, collective rights are the rights given to people who belong to one of the founding groups of Canada. These groups are Anglophones, Francophones, and Aboriginal people. Collective rights help to protect the collective identity of these groups, meaning they won't be forgotten or assimilated into the majority group. The collective rights tell the government how to protect these founding groups, and by enshrining the collective rights in the Constitution, the courts of Canada have the power to keep the government of Canada accountable of giving collective rights to these groups. Collective rights now are always on Canadian government's mind when making laws and policies.